Hello there guys, it's Joey. So this is going to be a Healing Witch video, and the Healing Witch videos, if you're not aware, are sort of a discussion of emotional states that I think relate to the spiritual well-being of a person, specifically me, but I think often we sort of talk about things that are maybe not quite trending, but are, you know, apparent within community as well. And today I really wanted to talk about problems of control and measuring up, and what I believe to be one of the key lessons of 2016, as I have tweeted already. And if 2016 has taught me anything, it is to refuse to be defined by anyone else. And I think that the issues of control, of the judgment that then becomes a form of pressure to conform, is something that is happening on a macrocosmic level in society, in the government, in the world in general, where there is a lot of volatility happening, a lot of discriminatory behaviour, which is horrifying and is possibly laying the groundwork for more and more militant control. And I think that is being replicated almost on a personal, microcosmic level, where in spiritual communities and in sort of human communities in general, there is suddenly this trend of trying to define one another and how one another interacts with us, and trying to control that and control other individuals, creating like rules and ultimatums that are being applied to personal relationships, and which are ultimately damaging. Just completely and utterly damaging to the fabric of our relationships with other individuals. And it's happening on like personal scales quite a lot. It's something that I have come into contact with directly myself on a number of occasions this year. It's been a theme this year, and it's gotten to the point where I just full on refuse to deal with that sort of behavior anymore, create personal boundary, create personal border, and I've seen it in groups that I am a part of, that people are struggling with other people's behavior, and they don't want to confront it because they're afraid to, and it becomes like this hostile volatility whereby people are putting their demands on other people, as in, you will behave this way, you will meet my way, you will do something this way, you will, or you can go fuck yourself, excuse my French. I don't know why we say that, but it's a measure of control that completely and utterly lacks empathy for the feelings, emotional states and well-being of the other person. There's no consideration. And I think when we talk about refusing to be defined by other people, we have to find a balance between refusing to be controlled and then compassion, because in any given relationship there is a measure of give and take, and that is balance between people, individuals. And to an extent we naturally become defined by community and people who we interact with, people who we choose to have in our lives for one reason or another, people who we care about and love. And I think a little measure of this, particularly in love and loving situations, which can be obviously relationships, but it can be like a platonic love as well, is that we perhaps tend to give a little bit more of ourselves and go a little bit further in trying to accommodate other people. And unfortunately, sometimes in certain circumstances, in certain situations, this becomes a painful and negative experience. And this theme has just been coming up over and over and over again. And like to the point where I have people from my past, from my ex-family who I want nothing to do with, trying to reassert their control with emotional manipulation. And it's gotten to the point where I just thought, I'm not engaging with that at all. And it's still upsetting. It's still upsetting to me. It's still something that, given that it's this time of year and it's specifically done at this time of year, to cause heartache and hurt, and manipulation, it still gets to me. I'm still, I'm not an uncaring rock, unfortunately, and I don't believe in the whole idea of spiritual people can just disconnect from certain situations. I think it's really anti-humanity to be like, oh well, you're too attached to blah blah blah, and if you were more spiritual you wouldn't feel those emotions. It's been said to people who are mourning, and like you are too attached to someone, so the loss of them is, you being too attached to whatever. And I think that is appalling in spiritual communities. I think it shows a complete lack of empathy, a complete lack of humanity, a complete lack of caring and consideration. And that's what I mean about finding this balance, because I don't think that we want to go too far down the path where we're like, nobody is going to tell me anything and I'm never going to be considerate of anybody and I'm never going to give, and because I'm not like that at all. I don't feel that that's a good way to go when interacting with other people. And I think a lot of us perhaps give more of ourselves than perhaps we should, but we'd rather be a little bit more caring and giving than down the other end where we are, not at all. And it's finding a balance between being cold and not giving anything and being standoffish. And I am cautious in new relationships as a result of past ones. But, and finding that balance between giving too much and not giving anything. It's finding a good, healthy balance, and that is no easy feat, and that is on a case-by-case basis, because, people, whole plethora of people are different, people are complicated, interactions with people are different, difficult, and complicated, and how much of yourself you give depends on who you are, what you're going through, your emotional and spiritual and mental states, even your physical states, because obviously if you're physically unwell you don't want to be giving too much of yourself, and this kind of has a repercussion on sort of like the spiritual and magical life. But there is an element and a control level that's going on recently that hurts my heart, it hurts my head, and it's like, I don't understand why. Are we just reflecting what's going on in the world right now, which is horrifying on a large scale, whereby people's freedoms and right to choose and right to spirituality and right to sexuality and, right to basic human rights basically are being thrown into question, and people, well, let's face it, white old men in office are dictating to the rest of the world their rights. And I think there's a level of reflection of this on a smaller scale, and there's nothing that turns my stomach quicker than seeing people who are determined to have things their way, and they use measures of guilt, control, blame, and then ultimatums are my ultimate pet peeve, because it's literally a complete and utter disregard of another person's feelings, emotions, experiences, and how they're addressing. It's like, I don't care if you have fears about a situation, I don't care if you have feelings about this situation, I don't care if you're unsure and you need help and you need support and you need balance about a situation. I don't care about that. You're going to do it my way, and if you don't do it my way, you're out of my life, goodbye. And there's been a lot of that this year, and rather than a kind of an approaching, it's not everything, okay, it's not like, I feel like I'm like focusing on the difficult parts of 2016, which I think we all are, because there's been a lot of difficult parts of 2016. It's not all been negative though. Let's get that out and up front, you know, that's not an entirely negative situation. And as a result of seeing these situations where it's like, well, unless you do what I want you to do, getting at you not welcome in my life anymore. And I've actually gotten to the point now where I'm like, bye Felicia, because if I don't want to be like that with other people. Now, there are certain points where certain behaviours are going to be completely unacceptable to you on an emotional level, on a moral level, on an ethical level, you know, and it's somebody engaging in those behaviours, and you're going to be like, if you continue with that, I can't be a part of your life. And I think there is a difference, and it's, again, finding that compassionate balance, depending on what the behaviour is. And we should remember to regulate ourselves instead of just looking outside of ourselves as well, of course. We've got to regulate our own behaviours and make sure we're not doing this to other people, and putting them in a position where they feel that they can no longer be friends or whatever, engage with us, which is another lesson from this year, is, you know, checking ourselves. So if this behaviour is deeply hurting you, there tends to be two sort of reactions in the spiritual community, which I've noticed. The first one I really don't agree with. The first one is, well, if this person's, who is your friend or lover or whatever, you know, close personal relationship to you, is acting in such a way that you are harmed by it, then you need to do shadow work and figure out why you're reacting to that way. That's your responsibility. And I feel, when I hear this, my head goes like, I get a twitch, and it's just like, there are two people at least two people involved in this situation. It is not on one person to do shadow work to see why they are bothered by somebody else doing something. That person is supposed to be their friend, lover, whatever, and they're supposed to respect the other person. They're supposed to care about the other person. They're supposed to love the other person. And so to go into a situation and deliver ultimatum, or deliver like a dump load of hatred or a dump load of guilt or a dump load of blame, is kind of disrespecting the relationship that already exists. And to say, well, you need to do shadow work because you're reacting, is kind of unhelpful in terms of a spiritual awareness. I think that, yes, in certain circumstances, perhaps if we are overreacting to a similar situation all the time, then we need to look at that and we need to do shadow work within ourselves. And yes, that is something on a personal level. But when you're talking about this person who is your dear friend or whatever, lover, loved one, has stolen from you, has cheated on you, has, I don't know, delivered you an ultimatum, has done all of this, then it's not on the individual who's the target of this to just do shadow work. That is not helpful, and actually it kind of feels like victim blaming. I'm not going to say that we're going to go as far as saying that the individual is a victim, because I don't like that word in the best of times, the best of circumstances, not a fan. But it is basically seeking to blame one individual rather than seeking balance, understanding, compassion, and finding a way through difficult circumstances together. Which I think if we applied that on a macrocosm and a microcosm level, the world would change. And it's just that we are deep into this shitty attitude right now of us versus them, and it has made itself very, very visible in politics, both in this country and in America in particular, but it's not just those two, it's, you know, worldwide. And the us versus them mentality is getting out of hand. It is basically giving rise to, you know, your sexism, your racism, your homophobia, your xenophobia, and all of the things where you define somebody as being different, so you pick on them or discriminate against them. And it's basically removing heart and soul from another individual, so they become other, and rather than sort of delivering empathy and compassion, it becomes a dehumanization and trying to define people in your terms. And you don't need to be defining people at all to extend a hand of compassion and understanding. People go through difficult circumstances. Now, different people will go through different life experiences, and they are completely removed from your experiences. So you can empathize perhaps, but you can't always fully understand. And there is a measure of humility in getting to the point where you realize that you don't have the right to tell anybody how they should or should not act, or how they should or should not feel. We can offer our feelings on a situation, we can offer our thoughts on how we might deal with something, and I always try to do this when asked for advice. I try to hesitantly say, well, this is how I would go about something, or this is how I feel about it. It's not that I particularly, and sometimes I bulldoze and just talk without thinking, and then later realise, did that come across as, this is what you should do, rather than this is just my opinion on something? Because when you want to help, or when you have quite strong opinions, it can be easy to slip. And that's one of my personal lessons this year, is to make sure I am asking a person how they feel about a situation, rather than offering advice up the front. I think, it's kind of a Virgo thing to be like, right, we can fix it, come on. Sometimes that's really not what people are about, or not what people need, or not what people want even, to the point where it's more about they just require compassion or empathy or an ear, or they want to vent and they want to release it. And sometimes that's really quite an important thing. And, on a sort of conversely, if you like, I've had people who don't understand that on occasion, and I think, to be honest, my sister is the only person who really understands this, because of the unique bond that me and my sister have, is that sometimes we just need to vent. And by venting, moaning, complaining, whatever you want to call it, we basically just release it all. We release all the things that are bothering us, irritating us. It's often, more often than not, little niggles. It doesn't matter. It's not going to matter in a day or two. It's not going to matter in a week or so. Some things matter a bit more. Some things upset us a bit more. But generally speaking, it's just something that we need to let out, and then it's gone. And other people have sort of bitched about that, to the point where I'm like, right, okay, I can't trust you with it then. So I can't trust you to understand that I just needed to release, and then I can focus on something more positive. So, okay, that's not, I won't do it anymore. That's not something that you and I can have as a relationship back and forth. And that's just two sides of that, because I understand on one hand that sometimes that I offer advice too quickly, and that can come across as kind of domineering rather than understanding and empathizing, so that's something I need to work on. And then on the other side of that, I understand that sometimes that other people have not recognized my actions for what I know they are, and rather decided what they are based on judgment, I guess. I think it becomes even more dangerous when we've decided that we will apply rules to other individuals' emotional states. Now, we will disclaimer here and say that I'm not talking about normal healthy boundaries between individuals that have rules. For example, I'm not talking about teenagers rebelling against the rule of being in by 10 o'clock from their parents. That's, when things are there like that, because it's a family unit, it's a loving family unit, and it's there for safety and family harmony, that's something to be hashed out between family members. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about here is when we've decided that we are going to apply rules to other people and try and force them to live by our rules. I've never been a one for this. I just mentioned family, but I was obviously in an unhealthy family unit, and the rules were constantly chopping and changing. Whatever would get me in the most trouble was the rule of the day, and therefore I'm very, very anti-rule when people are like, you know, try and apply rules to a situation. Like, if you're not my boss, which you're not because I'm my boss because I work for myself, no. Basically, I'm not going to bow down, scrape, beg to anybody, and I don't believe in trying to put people into that situation anyway. Like, why would you want to humiliate another individual? Which is basically what it is. You want to define them, you want to control them, you want to rule over them. There's humiliation. It's not part of a spiritual path walking whatsoever. Especially when you see people bringing elements of spirituality into it to back up their rule making, their, you know, oh, if you were a daughter of Morrigan, you would be more like this. There is no way faster on this earth for me to be like, you know what, how I am and who I am is between me and Morrigan, and that is my relationship with my deity. You don't get a say. You just don't get a say. We can talk and discuss and debate about Morrigan and the different issues and the definitions and modern evolutionary versus more reconstructional, and I'm fine. I can debate all day with you, but the minute you start telling me that I am not this, or Morrigan's daughters and sons are not that, I get like, you know what, you're a human being. I'm a human being, you're a human being, they're not. So I don't understand where it comes from. And it's not just pagan on pagan crime here. There's obviously other religion on other religion crime, which is widespread and full of hatred, and then kind of descends into the other isms that we already talked about, you know, your sexism, your racism, and your homophobia, and so on and so forth, is often justified in terms of spiritual path, which we touched on before in the Morrigan video when we talked about judgment. And this is kind of a step on from that, and how I've been feeling and needing to express this kind of disdain, and disdain's maybe the wrong word, it's frustration, absolute frustration with the idea of people needing to define the roles of other individuals. The only person who you can define is yourself. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is a work in progress. There is no one definition of a soul. There just isn't. There are so many ways up the mountain, like Flora would say. And there are so many different paths. There are so many different energies and feelings and experiences in the world that we can't possibly, to my mind, experience even half of the things this world has to offer in one lifetime. It's not possible. We get a fraction in one life. Now, to me, that's why reincarnation makes more sense, because of the vast array of experiences to be had out there, the many, many different lives that we can lead. And so to take our tiny little fraction of experiences and think that we can then judge and label and define and control other individuals based on our tiny little experiences, it kind of blows my mind a bit. It's like, we're not that, we're little in the grand scheme of things. Big goddess, little human. That's in my essay on, that one's on witch. There are some more on my blog if you're interested. But we're not all powerful gods. And I did talk about this. I talked about the frailty of the human condition recently on the blog, which is where I was going with that thought. And it's that, can we wake up in the morning and change the world in terms of clicking our fingers and reorganizing Ford style from Westworld? No. No. So we need to get over our egotism in that sense. We need to care about other people a little bit more. This is kind of what spirituality should be about is becoming more human. Elevating, but becoming more human. To connect to care about, to care, to hold each other's hands and say, you know what, we need each other as human beings, and it's not about what I think and is right for you, and it's not about what you think is right for me. It's just finding our way through as best we can and honouring the decisions and the feelings and the emotions of the other people around us, and just honouring each other as people. Okay, right, so I am done. Many blessings.